All right, sorry about that, everybody. Just trying to get all of this squared away, bouncing back and forth between different units. Okay, so what I want to do is continue what we started last week or last class, and just keep working with my demonstration, working on this wire shark. Obviously, you translate that to your own designs or take it as you like. I am recording the sessions, that way everybody can review this on their own later on, but don't be afraid to interrupt me or ask questions or so while doing so, because of course we're going to be going over things that are relevant to your design as well. So I'm going to turn the camera down and we'll get back to where I was. So I was working on my wire shark design here and taking some elements from the actual sketch and from the actual images. Now I've gotten to taking my profile, trying to get the camera set up here. Gotten my profile that I made just in 2D out of wire. Obviously it's all out of wire, but I slipped a coil over that, and that made sense for my design. So I then began working this coil down to better fit the profile. And where I left it was at the tail. Now I want to keep working on that. So basically what I'm going to keep doing is working this coil down around so that it better fits my 2D kind of flat profile. The issue here is it's not going to be a uniform like cone going downward, as I drew on this design, as the camera refocuses. There it is. It's not going to be a uniform cone, and then it tapers out to the tail, or at least in my design it does. So what I'm doing with that is I am working my way down and just bending the coil closer and closer, but much like how I did for the front of the shark, how it's not uniform either, it's actually more of an elliptical design where it's touching top and bottom, but it's a bit more flat on the sides, meaning it's a bit more squished down. Kind of doing the opposite on the back. It's going to be more round at the top and bottom, but then it's going to end up transitioning to flat to transition out to the tail. So I'm just going to keep working that down. And some of this will work better than others. And some of this you might have to go in and tweak it, because what I mean by that is the wire doesn't always bend exactly how you want it to. I'm gonna grab the pliers here. And I don't know how easily you can see this, but I can see it pretty clearly that the wire has started to bend in places I really don't want it to. Now you can always go back and work this out, but it's easier to do it now because the way I'm working in this one continuous coil. And all I'm doing is the wire kind of bent a bit more than I wanted over here. And I want it to be a bit more of a sharp bend at the top and bottom rather than on the sides. So all that means is I got to go in and I'm going to squish that wire down a little bit and hold it with the pliers, because I can just get tighter in with the pliers. That's all. And it might mean that you have to uncoil some of this a little bit and get back to it. And what I meant by the reason why I wanted to do this now rather than later, because anything I work on here will affect more of the coil down this way. Meaning if I have to make the coil a bit tighter over here, that affects more of it. And really, this is all just going to be play with it back and forth. And for that matter, it's not like it's impossible to like, oh crap, this wasn't working at all. I'll cut this out and then start over or start a new section here. I personally am just trying to make this work as a single piece. That's all. So just going to keep working my way down. See, like this one ended up being too tight already, so I just need to unravel that coil a little bit. Pull this out a bit more so that this is all a bit more uniform. But the whole thing, what I was trying to do here is I'm trying to complete, or at least get most of the way to where I want this coil here before I transition to the tail. because the tail is going to be much more flat. So I really want to kind of look over basically from the center down to the end of the tail. Do I want this coil more or less uniform? I can kind of pull at it or compress it down a little bit if it's a bit out of whack, but it's pretty well where I want it to, or where I want it to be. Now, I did warn you, or just mention at least, that as I make this coil, it's going to affect that inner profile. And that's what I meant by don't feel like you have to have that inner profile absolutely precise. The rest of what you're doing is going to affect that. And you just have to kind of work that back later. I was saying that I might use some finer wire to make more twists, like this one here, just to lock these profiles together a bit better. That would be ideal. Adding one here, locking that together would make my 2D plot, my 2D piece, meaning my silhouette profile, actually lock to my coil a little bit more effectively. So I'm just going to keep working the tail right now. I kind of want that to be a little bit more snug before I transition back to the tail, or the actual like fin part of the tail. Man, this is kind of starting to get a little bit wonky on me. Yeah, I need to try to tighten that up just a bit better. All right, that's in there. It's in the area that I want it to be, but I think I need to work it just a bit more. I'm sorry, I know I keep moving out of frame with the camera. I'm trying to keep that in focus and in frame, but I keep moving around. All right. Now at this point, it might be a little bit easier for me to just pull the rest of this coil out a little bit to get out of the way, because now I'm actually going to work a bit more flat, and I'm actually going to kind of zigzag back and forth against the tail here. Now you'll notice I don't have the bottom half of the tail yet, like it has in here. That's not even part of it yet, because I'm going to add that afterwards, because it just makes more sense for the design. At least I think so. This is not like a set of rules to follow. But all right, so I want to now bend this wire, my coil, flat back and forth in a zigzag across the tail. So how I do that, like I was saying before, to make a tighter bend, and again, I'm using 16 gauge wire. This is much thicker than the stuff you are all using. It will bend a lot more easily for you. I just didn't have any of that at the time when I started this. So I'm going to hold the wire right here. That's right at the edge of this frame. And I'm going to bend the wire against those pliers. It's not the tightest bend, but what I can do now is just come in here and smoosh that down a little bit with my actual flat pliers. And I'm just going to keep going back and forth doing that. Grab here, grab at the edge, bend the wire back around. Come back, smush a little bit. Keep going back and forth. Now, if you find out that you've accidentally, like I just did, I made that bend too far over, because now I got like this weird protrusion, that's okay. How to fix that? Unbend that as best you can. It's going to be a little, you're going to have this little, I'm trying to figure out how to best show this on the camera. You're going to have this little notch here. If I want to flatten that, what I'm going to use is I'm going to use my longer pliers. And instead of grabbing them like this, I'm going to try and grab lengthwise. And I'm just going to try to crush that bend right back out. It's not going to be perfect, but it'll be a lot closer than it was. And now I can go back and make my bend like I meant to. It's still a little wonky. Grab between. That's the easiest way to straighten out little bends that you didn't intend for. Squash back down. Yes, the technical terms of squish, smash, and such. Try to pull that out a little bit. And I'm not trying to make this completely uniform, just trying to get somewhere close, somewhere where I like it and it seems about right. Now I do want to try to make this bend here match up with this little notch, namely just because it sort of kind of makes sense to me. And because if I try to bend back and forth right here, it seems like it'll be a little more difficult. So I'm going to turn that angle up a little bit and make that bend back over there. That seems about right. Now, I've got all this excess, not really a big deal, but how do I finish this off? Now, some of you, it might make sense to double back, meaning bend the wire back around and maybe even continue back down around. I could even do that. Not really in this case, but so how do I finish that out? Well, we talked a little bit about making, when I was working on making these fins, pre-bending some tiny little loops in the end. That makes sense. I could just tie that loop. Oops, wrong pair. I could tie this loop just in right there and finish it out. But what you want to do before I go and clip all this off, I want a bit of a tail, but this whole coil here is just cumbersome. So I'm going to trim it off, but further down. So I have a bit more working room. Now I have something to actually grab onto, meaning this extra tail here. So when I go to bend that little hook, I could either do it by hand because I have enough extra space here, bend down and around, or I could use another pair of pliers to grab it and bend down and around. I'll finish it off with that. But now, because I have that extra space of this extra tail here that I left, it's a lot easier to grab onto. Now I can come in with my clippers, trim just a teeny little bit. So I'm left with, it's hard to see, I know. See if I can get this to focus properly. So now I'm just left with this teeny little hook there, and I can just bend that around. And for that matter, it could even be even smaller. See if that goes flying. Yep, that definitely landed somewhere. So I'll just bend that back in. And this is really just me trying to, finish that off in a reasonable way. So that's sort of kind of the body. It's got a spring to it because it is like legit a spring at this point. But otherwise it's just a weird tube with a fin on the end. Now again, remember this, I'm going to cut off here later. That's just a space holder. But now I can start looking at adding the fins and such. I can use my coil. That's some good extra space there. So let's see here. Okay. So that's that part. I made the fins earlier. I'm okay with those, but I don't want to put that in just yet because I don't feel like it. I do want to do though is I'd like to see, because I have an idea. As I said, I'm going to need to attach my profile frame that I made originally, just the flat profile. I'm going to need to attach that somehow at some point to the rest of my coil. Now I could add more little connectors here, something with some nice fine wire. That works really well. I highly recommend that. But because I want to be a smart ass about it, I want to try to see if I can incorporate the ends of these little hooks, this style, into the dorsal fin. And I want to see if I can make that all work together. So first, I'm going to take a piece of wire that's longer than I need and start bending the fin. Now I'm going to leave plenty of excess down here because that's what I'm going to make the hooks out of. I'm going to start by just kind of gently shaping the fin here. Then I'm going to grab a pair of pliers, hold right at the end here, and bend back around so I can get closer to that dorsal fin. Now, I am going to add a little bit of the concave bend to this side. It's way over bent right now because I just need to close this end up a little bit more, and it was just going to be a little bit more difficult to do so. So now, hold on to that and smoosh it down a little bit. Oh, that's not bad at all. It's a little out of whack, so I'll just nudge it back and forth like we talked about last class. Just instead of trying to sharply bend, what I'm doing is I'm just kind of grabbing in a couple of spots and just nudging the wire. So that's about where I want that to be. A little bit more bend right there. That's fine. Not bad. Okay, so I'm going to cut off some of this excess so I just don't have this huge thing hanging off that's just in my way. So what I'm going to do now, I want to add some little hooks to the ends of this. So I'm going to grab at the very end of where I want my fin to connect, and I'm going to wrap around now. And I'm just going to make a little hook. It's a bit larger of a tail than I need, so let me chop some of that off. I'm going to clip it a little bit long. That definitely went somewhere. And I'm going to do the same for up here. Now, what direction this bend goes, doesn't really matter. It's fine. But I'm going to do the same for up here. Hold there. Bend around. So these pre-bent little hooks really help out. That's about right. So to get that placed, I'm going to lay my profile down. And what I was trying to do is I was trying to hook both the silhouette frame and the coil in one. So you see let me see if I can get a clear shot here. It's hard to see with the camera, but I'm going to pull these two together as best I can. And I'm going to close that bend up. I'm going to try to at least. All right. Neat. That came out pretty decent. Or so far. So I haven't really crimped these hooks down too hard yet because I want to leave myself with a little bit of adjustment room. And then once I get it right where I want it to be, then I'll squash it down good and proper. But right now, that's not bad. Problem is it keeps wanting to slip down to one side. And I think that's because I put both hooks on going the same direction, meaning they both bent down and back this way. I think if I turn one the other way, it'll be fine. So what I'll do, since I didn't clip these both perfectly down, I'll just pop that off. If I can, there we are. And I'm going to hold the wire with one side. And then I'm going to just turn. That's not going to work. I guess I'll hold it this way. Probably should have bent this the right way for the first time. Yeah, that ain't working very well. There we go. Might just have to rebend it a little bit. So basically what I did is I just made it, if I can draw it a little more clearly. So if this were like looking straight on in my fin, I bent the hooks, one going one direction and one going the other. Obviously that'd actually be more in line, but just hoping that might balance out the fin here. All right, where did I have this placed? More or less about there. Oops, I'm trying to get both. Crimp that down a little bit, and then about there. Cool. Yeah, that actually straightened it out pretty decently. Since I had the hooks going in opposite directions. Nice. That actually worked pretty decently. All right, starting to develop some parts. Obviously, that's got to get tweaked. And right now I want to address what I've done here. Great, I don't have any clean paper. So the body has all the infill, but the fins, I think just for visual clutter and such, I think I'm actually going to leave the fins open like they are. As in, I don't need to add anything on the inside because that just kind of adds clutter. Meaning the main coil shows that the body is solid, but without anything inside the fin, it makes the fin look that much thinner. So, like a shark, right on in line there. I'll add bottom fin down here, and that again will show that like the top, it has a little bit more thickness to it, a little bit meatier, and the bottom fin will be a little bit thinner. So hopefully that'll just kind of mimic the actual parts of the shark. So we'll keep doing that. Let's see here. Oh, right. I have my other shark fins already made. Isn't that convenient? So I'll do the same down here. Now remember with this one, I made by doubling up, meaning I took a piece of wire, bent it in half, obviously a little bit more cleanly this way, and then cleaned it up back and forth. So I'll start that in a moment. Back to recording. Okay, where were I? Looking at shark fin wires. Okay, so last time I did this piece, made this by folding it in half, doing the major bends, and then unfolding it again. Basically, just like making a folded paper parts and like snowflakes and all that fun. So I do want to attach this, but because I am doing this kind of like I'm going to end up using another hook like this, I do want to wait, and because I need to use thinner wire to connect this, much thinner wire. It's going to get way too bulky, especially since what I didn't really plan around was my main connector in here. My main connector, when I made the silhouette, now kind of falls right where I want to put that fin. So I'm going to wait on that. So in the meantime, I'm going to put my fin and shark body aside. Now what I want to do is figure out, because I need some major parts, how am I going to go about making the head, the hammerhead here? Well, this is one of those spots where kind of had a fair idea for the body, profile, coil, that makes sense. Like many of you, trying to figure out how do I make a part that doesn't really have specific definition. Well, of course it does, but not really as obvious. So what I mean by that is, all right, I at least have a length, so I know how wide the head needs to be, but it also has obviously the eyes and these end pieces. It's hard to see on camera, I know. I don't have a Sharpie handy, but I want this profile here. And that's ultimately what's going to be at either end. Well, great. How do I make something out of that? This is the part you kind of have to just figure out. And I'm not telling you, I don't know, you do it. But it's definitely going to be something along the lines of playing with some designs and go from there. Now, I'm going to try my best to trace this. Like I said, the best way to do this is put this over a window, and you can do that. The other thing could be, I can put, if you have like just a white background or so on a phone, I'll just use the calendar thing. Hey, that gives me just enough light coming through to use that as a silhouette. So the ends are, where is that? It's harder to see still, but there we are. Eyeball right there. And something in between. Cool. All right. Hooray for technology as nothing more than a backlight. Okay, cool. That gives me a reference on that. Now I can say, all right, I want the head, and I can just measure stuff as in like just using, I guess I could actually use a ruler, or just like I do for drawing class, put my finger on the end of a pencil or so. So the length needs to be roughly to there. So my head fin, rectangle, hammerhead of the hammerhead shark, needs to be something like that. Okay. Well, from here, honestly, I'd say just start playing with ideas. Now, what comes to mind immediately is something akin to how I made the fins that I'll be attaching. Meaning, if I take a piece of wire, fold it in half to make this part, well, one, I'll end up with another little registration nub that'll work well, affixing that to the front of the shark, and I'll kind of end up with something not far from that. So that works for me. That works pretty well enough for me. Now just start playing. So grab a chunk of wire. Remember, get more than you need. Definitely more than you need. This is probably a bit too much more than I need. I'm just going to fold this in half. I am going to put a crimp in the end just to bring the two ends together a little more tightly so I get a more accurate connection there. Smooth this out a little bit. And yeah, I'll just start playing with this. Now, in reality, you do want to take note. For my pictures, it's hard to see, but this is why I tell you to get more references, because in my sketchbook, what I'm trying to figure out is I know that the front of the hammerhead shark is not a straight line. It's hard to see in here, but from my sketches I had another image that was showing me what it actually looks like. The actual front end is like this. Now, that's also because this is specific to the species of hammerhead shark I'm looking at. Some have a much more rounded, like shovel head. Some have more straight back and forth. Some have this more scalloped edge, which is for the scalloped hammerhead shark. Anyway, so it's got these undulations. That's what I'm going to try to mimic. So what it is it's got a notch right in the center. Hey, isn't that convenient? And then about at quarters, there's another kind of notch. So it kind of does something more like that. Kind of, sort of-ish. And again, remember, we're trying to get this as close as we can, sure, but this isn't trying to be absolutely photorealistic. We're just trying to get close to it because this material doesn't necessarily translate to photorealistic. And then the back end, they kind of come to points, like it has in my sketch here, and then it does loop back around. So what I know, that means it needs to come back a bit and kind of do a something not unlike this. So all I'm doing here is trying to rough out, well, frankly, what I'm doing. Put my actual piece on top. All right, that shows me that's about what I need it to be. Cool. I will make that. I'm going to start from the center and work my way out. Now, what I do want is that little scallop there. So I'll start by bending downward a little bit because I'm basically making half of the bend first. And this is still a little too tight for me to actually hold with my hands. But now I can start to do the little bends. I need to hold this side with my pliers. Bend back up. Because I'm trying to make that next little notch. Start to bend back around. That's all kinds of wonky. I'm trying to straighten that out a little bit. There we go. That's not bad. It's not great, but it's not bad. So now I need to make this sharper bend. It doesn't need to be at a precise 90-degree bend, but it does need to be a pretty hard bend. So I'm going to hold my pliers at the end here of absolutely where I need to bend. And then on the opposite side of that is where the bend starts to occur. Make sure you've got both pairs of, or both wires there. And I'm just going to bend on downward. Cool. Now, I'm just making a profile here. I'm going to end up filling this in a bit more later. Now I'm going to do the same back over here, but this is going to be a lot more of a bend. So, and I actually need it to bend a bit more, not just 90 degrees, but I actually need it to go more. So not just flat, but it needs to come back around. So I'm going to use my needle nose pliers because I can use the round of the needle nose pliers to get back around that. So grab right meow. There we go. Yeah, something not unlike that. Now to do this bend here, because I need to basically push in and fold that, but it needs to start over here and I can't get my finger close enough. I'm going to hold that side with the pliers. That makes it a small enough spot. Now I can bend backwards. So this is what I mean by it's all about just different ways you can hold the wire and such, and using the pliers as stand-ins. Your fingers can't necessarily get in either close enough, or the side is too tight and you'll end up just stabbing your hands, stuff like that. You know, good fun. We try to avoid. So that's not bad. And don't forget, you know, if something isn't really turning out quite right, this very much could be just a test piece. But that looks pretty good. So I'm going to also decide I can cut this now, but I want to wait on that because, well, one, I've already made this shape before in a different class, but I did come across something before. I don't have my model from before, but let me show you what I'm thinking. I already have this other pair of fins. Clear this off a little bit. I already have this other pair of fins. These are going to go about right there. That's fine. Somewhere in there. The head is going to come up here. But one of the other major features that's got to be in somewhere is the gills. How do I get something that is floating more or less in the middle of a body? How do I incorporate that? Well, what I noticed before, what I could do is in this drawing, the hammerhead of the Hammerhead Shark, sorry, I can't stop doing that, blends into the body, but kind of on this major ridge here. And the gills are all right here. I could try to incorporate the rest of this tail into the gills. I could try. Now, how would I go about that? Yeah, that's a reasonable question. So what I was looking at before is maybe instead of cutting these tails off here of what's going to be my head, maybe I can start to bend these in a zigzag and make that part of the gills. So that's what I mean by you can have to start looking at, and many of you already have, just in looking at your sketches alone, but how that might incorporate into something. So if I look at my shark head here, and the gills need to be roughly here-ish, I'll see if I can do that. It might turn out okay. It might be god-awful. And I might just have to incorporate that elsewhere. But I wanted to try. So the trick to this is going to be, though, if I look at this right on or straight on, well, the gills need to go zigzag back and forth, or rather, let me draw this straight down. The gills will need to be somewhere back here, but then they're going to need to kind of zigzag back and forth roughly there. Well, but that goes in opposite directions. Yeah, that's a good point. So what I was thinking about doing is bending them this way and then twisting the wire at a 90-degree angle in either direction so that they'll end up going in opposite directions. And then when I unfold this half, they'll be in the right way. I'll show you what I mean. Let's see if this actually works. Like I said, it might be a neat idea. It might be absolutely awful. So just trying to get an estimate here. The gills start from like the back of the head at about the length of this pin here. Okay, fine. So back of the head, right about there. All right, that's about where the gills start. And just counting, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's 5 gills. Okay. Let's see if I can actually do this. Again, I already know perfectly well, thinner wire would have been a lot better, but we're here now, so whatever. So like I've been doing, I'm going to grab on the opposite side of where I want the wire to be to start, and then I'm going to start the bend right there. Bend 90 degrees roughly. How tall do these gills need to be? About roughly there-ish. They're not all going to be the same, but close. So I'm going to start the bend, but I want this to be a lot tighter. So I'm going to bend back down and around. Now I'm going to crush these because I want this to be as tight as possible. And it kind of already started to go a little bit wonky on me. Now, that doesn't look terrible. Now I'm going to bend out again. I want a little bit of space between the next one. So I made the 90-degree bend, put my pliers in place, bend upwards. That left me with a little gap. Well, I can already see right here, I'm not going to have enough wire. This should have been a lot longer. But we'll keep going for just the experiment here. These need to be a little bit smaller. I'll bend down and around. Smush the crap out of them and hopefully not my finger. Bend those more or less flat. There we are. So obviously this isn't going to work because I don't have nearly enough space, but I can always redo it. But I just wanted to see if it would work. But what I was talking about as far as bending things in 90-degree angles and such. So first what I'll have to do is I need the gills to point upward. So I'm going to hold back here across the half of my hammerhead, rotate this wire up and this wire down. So now my gill pieces are at 90 degrees from the head. Now I can unfold the head. And in doing that, the head is unfolded. I might need to smush that little nub down just a little bit. Not bad. But you see what I mean? Now the gills are where they should be. I'm going to need more, so this won't work. But it's not a bad idea. So now when I went to slip the head over the body of what I've been making, oops, it's upside down. That's about where they should be. Yeah, there was a big question in my voice there. Yeah, that might not actually have been the right length either. Let's look at where that's supposed to be. I think I started a little bit too far back, but I got some decent lines there. They're about right. All right, well, I'll scrap the idea. The other idea I had, and this is what I did for my other shark, is instead of making this one piece, I made this a separate part. But what I then also did is I used copper or a different metal for these gills because of my coil design, these little vertical slits really get lost in the overall visual of this. So that's definitely a spot you should consider. Where might other parts be more visible if you use a dissimilar metal, like the copper, or if you've gone and picked up something else for that matter? So keep that kind of thing in mind. But I will have to trim the gills off of this. Sorry, Shark. You're going to have gills a different way. This ain't going to work. So I'll keep working at that. So since I decided that my gills are not in the right spot and all of that, all right, fine, I'll accept defeat on that. I'm going to go ahead and just cut these off, and I'm going to incorporate little hooks into the end of my shark head. That way I can change that out. So I want to give myself the most amount of space, so I'm going to go ahead and cut this off far back as I can, because ultimately when I attach this head, it still does, I still want to have this kind of sweep back into the head. So my first instinct would be to add hooks at the very end, but I want to make sure that that's actually a reasonable spot to put them first. And yeah, that seems like it's about right. There's those ends meet up at the coils roughly at the end. So yeah, I'll do that. So one thing I do want to do is put the hooks going inward. Now, one problem you're going to run into, like I've said in the past, leave plenty of space. Well, I don't have much space right here because I just have this little nub. If I try to do that by hand, I am going to slice the crap out of my thumb. Do not do that. What is another option? Well, I could try to hold this with 2 pliers, but sometimes it's really hard to do because it's so small. Maybe I can swap the pliers. That's definitely a lot stronger, but I still have trouble bending that little hook around. So the best option, I think, is going to be, I'm going to start the bend with the hook, with these pliers, and then finish it off with the other pair. So to do that, what I'm going to do is, instead of mushing it into my finger and again destroying my finger, I'm going to use the tabletop in place and roll that inward. So I'm going to go to the edge here and roll it downward, but that's going to interfere with right here. So what I actually going to do is I'm going to just use this piece of paper as an example. I'm going to go to the edge of the table, pretend this is the edge, and roll this down and over the edge of my table. Because you need a lot more force to bend over a small area. So I've got that wee little hook there now. Now I should be able to grab with this side and continue pushing that downward. It's just helpful if you already have that hook started. Rolling this over the edge of the table. That got a lot better. I'm going to close this up a little bit more before I attach it. Now when I go to put that around the coil, I have a pretty small hook that I can just close up. Should be good. Do the same to the other side. Try to get those about right. This definitely would have been better to do before I unfolded the whole thing, but that's all right. You got the partial bend, do the rest of the bend, ish. Close up that little hook a bit. Not too shabby. Not too good, but not too bad either. All right, so that's a good starting profile. I'm going to be able to hook that onto my head, or hook the head onto the rest of the body rather. But before I do any of that, this is just the profile looking down. Now I got to figure out doing that kind of teardrop edge, and how do I fill in anything, or am I going to fill in anything in here to give myself some definition? Yeah, it's a good question. I got to figure that out. So for the time being, I'm going to leave this profile of the head to the side. I'm going to leave my main fins to the side because I don't really like those yet. I think they need to be bigger, but I don't really like them entirely. I might have to redo those. Get rid of my gills, since that's not going to work. I do have to figure out a new option for those gills. Think I'm going to use copper wire for that, but I don't have copper wire on hand because I gave it to everybody. But that's about where I'm going to try to figure out my next step from for next class. I like how the dorsal fin looks. I'm going to make the lower part of the tail fin, but looking across, don't forget, I also have the additional intermediate fins, and I forget what those are called now. I had them in my head and I lost the term for them. That's probably okay. And I'm trying to figure out also on other sharks, say like if I was making a great white shark or a mako, which those have very similar body types or anything like that, am I going to incorporate the mouth? On a hammerhead shark, the defining feature is the hammerhead. The mouth is much more subtle, so that might be something I can omit entirely. Maybe it will be a simple piece of additional wire. I don't know yet, but that's the thing I'm trying to figure out still. So you don't have to have all the answers just yet. So that's where I'm going to stop the recording for today. And we'll continue it later.